corridor studies, area studies, maybe road safety assessments. So these would be the more resource intensive studies, but we'd be saving these here for those corridors and those areas that maybe warrant those the most. And so again, kind of looking at this from a reactive or responsive type approach. Corridor studies, area studies, with our highway safety assessment program. So these would be the more resource intensive studies. So these would be the more resource intensive studies. Corridors in those areas, roadway that may be corridors in those areas for pedestrian and bicycles. That's really looking at those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this corridor studies, area studies, looking at state corridor studies, area studies would be the more safety assessment. So these would be the more resource intensive studies. So these would be the more resource intensive corridors in those areas that may be warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this corridor studies, area studies, safety assessments. So these would be the more resource intensive studies. So these would be the more resource intensive studies. Corridors in those areas that corridors in those areas warrant those. That may be warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this corridor studies, corridor studies, so these would be the more resource assessment studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors, these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors in those areas that may be warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this corridor studies, resource assessment studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors in those areas that corridors in those areas warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this corridor studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors, these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors in those areas warrant those. So that may be in those areas warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. Assessment. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors in those areas warrant those. That corridors in those areas warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a warrant those. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So again, kind of looking at this from a reactive. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. So these would be the more resource assessment studies. Corridors in those areas warrant those. So if you're not familiar with those areas warrant those. That may be in those areas warrant those. So again, improving the safety of all users from reactive towards that probably here quite often. So, and it does that again from a data-driven approach. It works to get local engagement. Equity is a part of these plans as well, but it really is meant to reflect those local priorities and to get activity, kind of an excitement kind of at a local level there as well. And so we recently completed one of these. You see the link there at the bottom right for one that we completed for the Burlington Graham MPO, and that's been successful. We've the MPO there has really kind of taken that and been able to implement that data into other planning activities at the city and the MPO level. So that is something that we're certainly encouraging more of at the MPO level. And again, kudos to French Broad River MPO there for taking action and going after that Safe Streets for All grant, which is, again, something that we talked with the MPOs and RPOs a good bit about. So if you're not familiar with this program, it's a $5 billion discretionary grant program. That the eligible activities there are really to develop a comprehensive safety action plan or to implement projects that can be found in your safety action plan. One interesting fact here is that the eligible recipients here have to be local government, so MPOs, municipalities, tribal, those would be the eligible recipients here. The state is not eligible to receive these grants directly. So a lot of money here obviously set aside for these types of improvements, and again, your MPO area and RPO area here are well tuned in to these opportunities. And this, I won't spend much time on here, but you'll see kind of who won grants in that first round of funding for this particular grant opportunity. I won't go into these here, but again, we had a lot of good discussions with the MPOs and RPOs. A lot of that was listening to them, maybe what are some of the needs from a data perspective, from a policy perspective, where are some of the areas that that you may be struggling with, so that helps kind of inform kind of our planning as we go forward. Lastly here, I'll kind of just briefly touch on step 3, which is where we are now, which is really that strategy development and developing a final report and actions there. This is essentially the stage that we're at right now. So it's really kind of taking what we learned from the data, what we heard, what we learned from those consultation outreaches, and kind of consolidating that, and again coming up with strategies to help improve bicycle and pedestrian safety at the state level. So again, our next step is really to kind of finalize the assessment as a whole. We are certainly supporting local and regional safety planning efforts. That's a big push from our perspective here over the next few years. And then this data analysis, the dashboards that I mentioned to you, that type of data will be updated and maintained going forward. And then, of course, coordinating this assessment with our strategic highway safety plan update. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have now. If you don't have any at the moment, you see my contact information there. I'd be happy to talk further after the meeting today.
Hey, Brian, thank you. That was a great presentation, really informative. And yeah, raise your hand if you have any questions. It looks like Randy's first in the queue. Randy.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for all the work you're doing on this. And it's super important, because we have, I'm sure the culture is not one that facilitates safe transportation for even cars, let alone for bikes and pedestrians. And so anything we can do to help make it safer is better. And on the map, for example, looking at like crash fatalities and bicycle fatalities, I mentioned this already, but I'm going to mention again, we saw several on Hendersonville Road deaths that's happened, where bicycles have been on Hendersonville Road and killed one just very recently. And speeding is a huge issue on that road. And there is no traffic enforcement in Asheville. That division's been disbanded by the city police, so we don't even have any traffic enforcement. And there's a sign that tells you how fast you're going, and is green numbers if you're within an acceptable range, and says thank you. And then it goes to red when you're going too fast. And the speed limit is 45 miles an hour on Hendersonville Road. And this sign's at Seminole Street. I can tell you exact location. I drive by it every time going south. And that sign stays green up to 49 miles per hour, up to 5 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour over the speed limit. And then at 50, it says you're going too fast. So, and that's an NCDOT road. And so already, like I said, bikes are being hit on that road and killed. Again, one very recently, and it was because of speeding. And that to me says that NCDOT is okay with people going faster than the speed limit on that road. And I don't get that. I mean, that goes so counter to what you just presented. It's the exact opposite. So these planning efforts are being put forth, which are great. And I know, everything you said in this presentation was fantastic. But then when we see what NCDOT is doing in actuality, encouraging speeding on a road where fatalities are happening to vulnerable users, I don't know how that doesn't gel to me. That doesn't go together. I doubt you're in charge of all that, but you do work on NCDOT, and it's just flabbergasting to me to see NCDOT encouraging speeding on a road that has fatalities on it.
Yeah. Point taken. Yep. And that is one of the things that we noticed during the VRU assessment is certainly these higher speed, 45 mile per hour multi-lane corridors. Of course, those are the areas where you do tend to see a lot of bicycle and pedestrian type events, particularly pedestrians, as you've got longer crossing distances, and you match that with the speed. Obviously, the higher the speed of the vehicles, the more energy your body, or if you're walking or riding, you're going to have to absorb, and that's the likelihood of getting out of that situation unscathed is less, with the higher speed. So, point taken. I jotted that down as you mentioned it. So,
thank you.
I know the links are not in our agenda. Brian, is there a quick way to get to the dashboard in particular, which I thought looked like a pretty useful tool? What's the quickest way to access this info?
Yeah, I will dump it into the chat, and I'm looking for the chat as we speak. We don't do a lot of the Google Meet meetings. Okay, here we go. I got it. So yep, I just dumped a link to the pedestrian and bicycle dashboard in there as well. And there's other links kind of within that map as well. So that data is presented a number of different ways. If you're more comfortable with just kind of taking it and downloading the shape files and working with it in your environment, there's a way to do that as well. So if there is more, more questions that can't be answered through the dashboard, of course, certainly you can reach out to us, and we're happy to help with that as well.
Great. Elizabeth.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, because we're always talking about speed limit changes on roads. Who ends up, once that is approved and the speed limit changes that we've been talking about for several months happen, is that the DOT or the city government, Department of Transportation, that actually goes out and changes those signs and makes that so?
Yeah, and it depends really on kind of the ownership of that road. So if it's a DOT road, it's typically the DOT's responsibility. We would do that in coordination, of course, with a municipality if it's within a municipality's boundary. If it's a municipal street, then often they have, of course, statutory speed limits that are kind of the default speed limits. And then if that's adjusted, that would typically be a city decision.
Okay, thank you.
Randy, back to you.
Sorry, yeah, just to real quick respond to that too. The ones that are presented to us here at the multimodal are all city streets, city controlled streets. And we don't right now have a process to talk to NCDOT about adjusting speed limits, but we'd like to do that. So that's something that we're very concerned with, because many of the streets that have speeds that seem too high on them are NCDOT streets. But so far, Elizabeth, the only ones that have been presented to us are city streets, which Chris will do today. But Brian, we'd very much like to open up a conversation with, and I don't know if that's directly done with Division 13 or someone else, but on some streets that we'd like to see speed limits lowered on some of those streets too.
Yeah, and typically those conversations do start at the division level. We have, in our traffic safety unit, we actually have 8 field offices, and they're kind of responsible for writing those ordinances and also kind of helping with that speed setting as well, speed limit setting as well. And so, like I said, typically those conversations start at the division, and they'll get our folks involved as well as you go through that.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I think also maybe that's something the commission can lean into and take some leadership on. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Are there any other comments or questions for Brian before we let him go? Kenny.
Yeah, just appreciate the presentation, and it's nice to hear DOT being proactive about vulnerable road user safety. So thanks for that. I saw that it had community suggested improvements in there as like a factor that y'all are looking at. Is that through the 5-year cyclical process that you're going to be doing to update this this analysis, or is that like if I'm just walking down the street and I have an idea for an intersection improvement, how do I move that forward?
Yeah, so a lot of the what I've mentioned today are funded through safety funds, and so those are meant to be more quick response type projects. So they don't go through the typical STIP type process, if that's what you're familiar with. Obviously, if we have a safety concern, we want to be able to address that quickly, and that's kind of how our programs are set up. And so our federal safety funds are open to all public roads. It's a competitive process. And so again, you would kind of work through your division, or you can work through our regional traffic engineering office, which I can provide contacts with as well, to kind of get that process started. If it's a city street, if it's a city-owned street, and we use federal safety funds, it is federal money, and I know sometimes there's sometimes the cities have concerns with using that type of money. There's stipulations that go along with using that, but for our safety funds, they're generally open for improvements on all public roads. Again, it's just a competitive process, so we have very limited funds in that safety pot of money, and so that's why there is a competitive, responsive type process in place to determine where those funds go. And those are really looking at, with safety funds, we're looking at low cost, high impact type projects. So again, limited funds, but we want to be able to make the biggest impact with those that we can statewide.
Thank you, Brian. And I think Joe is pointing out in the chat that folks who are tuned in, are unable to see that link. Is that right, Joe? Can we share the link for the VRU page also?
That was, Brian had mentioned a separate page in addition to that
Gotcha.
pedestrian crash.
Oh, gotcha. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks,
I
Brian.
will. I'll dump that in the chat here as well. Yep.
Thank you, Brian. Well, really appreciate your time and the information. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Next on the agenda, folks, is speed limit changes. So a good segue from Brian into this. And this is a review and receive input on proposed speed limit changes on, it looks like 8 different places. And while this is a very important agenda item. Yeah, Leanna, go ahead.
Yeah, Brian's just still sharing his screen and he'd probably prefer not to.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is obviously a very important agenda item, but in order to move through the other items that we have, once the presentation from Chris is complete, if you can limit your comments to 1 comment, obviously that's not a hard and fast rule, but we want to avoid going too deep into the weeds on each street that perhaps is in your neighborhood. I'm guilty of that in these meetings, but and then perhaps make a single motion that moves this forward. So again, I don't want to minimize the importance of speed limit changes, but I also want to make sure we're getting to our other items. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And Chris Cairns, will you correct my pronunciation?
I will not. It is correct. I am Chris Cairns, the city traffic engineer. Thank you, Jack. So I am going to share my screen. I think you have a link to this report. And I'll start by saying these are city and state roads. It kind of varies by the round of speed limit changes, but this one we have several that are state road changes. And I will point those out in this broad map. Louisiana Avenue, Elkwood Avenue, and the Amboy Road, Meadow Road. There's a small area they're changing there. And Sandhill Road is already changed. I'll get into all that in a moment. But DOT requests concurrence, or actually requires concurrence from the municipality before they will make the change in speed limit. So otherwise it just remains as is. And all of these proposals are speeds going downward. And the 7 streets that the city reviewed are all residential streets. They came from concerned citizens and also from Biltmore Park Association, who wants to promote more consistent speeds throughout their neighborhood. So I will start going down area by area, and I'm just breaking this down. I should have done this by state road and city road, but it was so spread out throughout the city. So I'll just start here. Sandhill Road, NCDOT implemented the school zone speed limit of 20 miles per hour this August by the Lucy S. Herring Elementary School. That's something that was well received by the school. We are just putting it here in order to put it into our city code and make it, I think, more enforceable. Amboy Road and Meadow Road, they're basically just reducing the 35 mile per hour speed limit to 25 in the congested area of Riverview and Lyman, just so basically around that little bend and where the construction is happening right now. And Louisiana Avenue, I know a citizen contacted NCDOT to reduce the speed limit. They evaluated and recommend 30 miles per hour between Haywood Road and Patton Avenue. And then City Street, Walton Street is something that we got some complaints about speeding. There was requests for traffic calming, and with no speed limit assigned, its default is 35 miles per hour, and there is no assigned speed limit with Walton. So we evaluated it, and we are recommending 25 miles per hour, consistent with many other streets in the same area. Let's going elsewhere in the city. Elkwood Avenue is another is state road. I do not know the origin of this one, but I know they reviewed it and are recommending a more appropriate speed limit. 35 is a bit much in that area, and they're reducing it, or with city concurrence, will reduce it to 30 miles per hour. Middlebrook Drive, this actually came from a resident who lives on Middlebrook. It is not in code right now, so by default, it is 35 miles per hour. It connects New Haw Creek with Old Haw Creek roads. So it's kind of a little short segment that people go a little bit too fast on. So we're recommending a 25 mile per hour more residential speed than the default 35. And then moving down to Biltmore Park, the main one that we wanted to start with, and we're going to phase more in as time goes on, but Pinchot Drive, it goes right by the school. There's trail crossing, and it's all residential, and currently it is 30 miles per hour, and that's really not appropriate for the area. The context is definitely more toward 25 miles per hour. And then these short stubs of streets that you see highlighted, Holt Lane, Bainbury Court, and Sorrel Court, those basically we're just working our way from Overlook westward to start organizing the streets to be more consistent. And then we were also pointed out that Dearborn Street has no speed limit signs where it is highlighted, and that's because it's not in code. So we are making it consistent with Dearborn that is just south of that. And I believe that is it. This is just the text version of all that. You have that in the presentation link, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, starting with Randy. Yes, Randy.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I know you're not surprised, but yeah, thanks first of all for letting me know that some of these are state roads. My understanding was before that we weren't doing the concurrence here, but thanks for doing that too, because it's super important. There's a lot of state roads that that we could be adjusted. So my one comment to keep it to Jack's request is on Walton Street. So, and I know you and I have had this discussion many times before, but I really think that 20 miles per hour is a better speed than 25 on that road. That's an extremely narrow road, just like Oakland is next to it. It goes by Walton Street Park, and I really think that park zones should be the same as school zones with that 20 mile per hour speed limit we have on Sand Hill Road in that area, but next to the school. So the same thing should be for parks, which I think this would qualify for. And yeah, the Walton and Oakland, I mean, they're one-way streets and they're just super, I think Walton's a one-way street too. I know Oakland is, but they're super narrow, and 25, I think it's still too fast for that street. And if you look at the League of American Bicyclists page we talked about earlier about slow streets, they talk about 20 miles per hour being the appropriate speed, and they're judging it from a national and international level of what's a neighborhood street. And I know that our standard and consistency is 25, but I think that's too high. I think that we need to establish a new standard and make it 20, not 25. So I'm really glad that we're lowering a lot of speed limits in these areas, but I think Walton needs to be 20, not 25.
I appreciate that, Randy. And I will point something out along the line. I never disagree with you about slowing speeds. Something that we need to consider longer term more broadly is if we try to go lower, almost all streets will qualify for traffic calming, and we just do not need a city full of speed cushions and speed humps. And actually, it'll be very difficult to install them on all streets. But I just put that out there because Oakland Road, immediately parallel south, is 25, and we are on our next traffic calming project. We will be installing speed humps on Oakland Road because people are going above 30 miles per hour.
Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Chris. My one comment is going to be on Elkwood, which is probably a road I'm going to guess I know Lucy knows where Elkwood is. I'm just curious. So I know technically it changes names when it gets down to Riverside Drive, but what is the reasoning to stop it at Hickory Street and not just continue it down that last little blip? Does it fall into Woodfin at that point? I can't remember where the boundary is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually did not get their full study, and I didn't ask that question. The city limit stops right around Hickory. the city of Asheville's limits. And my guess is they carry that. I don't know this for sure, but I can check and let you know. But I don't know that they would. It would be a little bit illogical to just stop the speed limit change right at Hickory. DOT just needs our concurrence for the segment within the city limits. So
Okay.
I can find that out.
That's like I said, I couldn't remember where Woodfin, where the line was there, because I mean, I use that as a way to not ride on Riverside, and I think a lot of cyclists do that as well. They'll go on Riverside, go up that way, and yeah, it is nice, and it definitely, even car driving at what's posted there is crazy. So thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Joe.
Elizabeth has her hand up.
Yes, I have a question more about the process, because I know we do these several times during the year. What is the process from here in terms of how long it takes to actually get a sign up? Like once you all have done this, and I love all of this. I love all the speed limit reductions, but I know that there's some that we took some action on back in the spring, like March or April, and I happen to be near a couple of them, and there's no sign change yet. So what is the time frame for this process?
Well, that's concerning to me that you haven't seen changes, but that's a good question. Generally, what the process is, now that we've presented and gotten some feedback from the Multimodal Commission, it will go to, well, I'm trying to get it on an agenda, or I will get it on an agenda for City Council. These have to be approved by City Council before we can implement on the city streets. And right now, I'm estimating that I can get this on the October 24th City Council agenda. If not, it would be the following one. And then once, if all of them are approved on the city streets, I would, generally speaking, it's about a month before we get all of them installed. And on the state roads, then we actually provide them with a concurrence form signed by the city clerk, and then they have to take that to Raleigh to create their own ordinance. So that one takes a little bit longer. Usually that's more like a 2 to 3 month process after what I've seen so far after city council approval. But if you have some that were not changed, I would be glad to know where those are and follow up on that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for pointing that out. So this is an informational item. Can someone help here? Do we make a motion to recommend these?
Sorry, I think.
This is just information today. There's no motion needed.
Yeah, got it. Randy, what were you saying there?
Well, just so I really want to thank Chris, because he's been proactive in this. So a while ago, a year or two ago, the speed limit was changed and we weren't aware of it, and it wasn't a part of the process. And so I asked if we could be included in this process. And Chris went out of his way, I think, to start doing this without even, right? I mean, nothing official ever happened. Chris said, "Hey, I can do this. I can bring these to you, and you can know what's going to happen in this too." So there is no formal process of us having to approve them. They're basically for our information and input to Chris. And then, if we would strongly object to something, we can make a recommendation against something, but basically Chris is just giving us this opportunity. And so we might need to formalize this process sometime in the future, but at this point in time, it's very much a courtesy that I think Chris himself, you initiated. I don't think it was even directed otherwise, right?
I actually don't recall. I recall this discussing the presenting to the commission, but I don't remember whose idea, if it was mine or not, but it's a good idea, and we don't always make changes, but I do recall some earlier this year where we adjusted a couple based on some feedback. So the feedback is always welcome, and the discussion as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that context, Randy, and Chris, thanks for your work. I realize there's a lot of nuance in changing speed limits and how that affects other roads. And I know it's a complicated calculus, so I appreciate you coming in, spending time. Any other questions or comments before we move on to our next agenda item, folks? All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Next, the next agenda, new business agenda item is the College Patton Complete Streets project update. And that has my name attached to it. So, and Kenny, I wanted to take a moment to give an update on the Downtown Commission that we attended, that I attended. I think Kenny attended virtually. And then I wanted to, thanks to everyone for your contribution to the letter from this commission to City Council regarding that bike project. That letter is included in the agenda, so part of the record. And as well, we have a recommendation, a motion that came from the Greenway Committee at their last meeting that we'd like to put on the record and share. And I think it's appropriate for us that when the committee makes a motion or a recommendation, then that travels to us where we can comment or motion onward to City Council. And the Anna Sexton of the Transportation Department presented to the Downtown Commission. My understanding is that the Downtown Commission, it was for informational purposes only. They did not have a quorum in any case, so they did not vote one way or another. Months earlier, they had voted 6-3 in favor of the project. So the purpose of Anna's presentation was to update where the project stands, some responses to concerns, changes that were made to the project to accommodate various issues that came up. And I also made a public comment reading a portion of the Multimodal Transportation Commission's letter that we sent. I'm afraid it was too long to fit into 3 minutes. So, but that's a bit of the update. There were really good questions from the commission members that were there. At least one commissioner from the Downtown Commission, that is, was strongly in support of the project. I don't know where the others stand on it, but that's a bit of an update. Kenny, do you want to add to that?
You kind of covered it. So the Greenway Committee, now the Active Transportation Committee, did make a formal motion recommending that council support this project and approve it. So I think as our purview is to take that recommendation and discuss and move forward, or choose not to move forward. So I think the motion, did I make the motion? We don't have the minutes yet, but it was really just saying, here's our letter of support. So read the letter and then vote to approve this project.
And I believe in the minutes, or pardon me, in the agenda, we have a letter that was sent by the Greenway Committee. This was a letter that they sent to City Council following the City Council meeting a couple of weeks ago in which the project was discussed. Lucy, is there anything to add regarding what's coming up regarding the bike project that we should know that I haven't covered?
I think that you mentioned that on October 10th, City Council will be considering a resolution to support the project and allowing the city manager and staff to move forward with the work needed to take it out to bid. That's the next step. Did I answer your question correctly?
Yeah, Lucy, thank you. Let's open the floor to any questions. Randy, you're up.
I just want to encourage, well, thanks, Val. First of all, the letter evolved over time, and I think it's great. The MMTC letter, you really hit a lot on the safety issues, which I think is really, that's our trump card, is that it'll be safer downtown. And if council is really concerned with safety, they'll move forward in this project. But I do want to say that on that October 10th meeting, we can come as individual citizens too to that meeting and make public comment. And so I'm just getting back from a trip the night before, so hopefully I'll be able to come to that meeting. But I'm planning to do it just as, you know, not representing even MMTC. I'll probably say that I'm on MMTC, but just to come there and make comment. And Jack, if you want to make more than 3-minute comment, you can do that. You just have other people sign up for comment and then cede their time to you too. So if we ever have that situation in which we want to talk for 6 or 9 minutes or whatever, you just bring a friend and then they can give you their time too. But I just want to let you know that if people feel strongly about this, because it seems like this is bordering on ridiculousness, the way this has been drawn out, and it a few loud voices downtown are really skewing this, and so maybe we need to raise more of our voices with public comment too to get this back on track.
Yeah, Elizabeth, and then to Bill.
Hi, Jack, I know that I was included in those emails between you and Meredith Friedheim about going to the Burton Street Neighborhood Association meeting, I think in an attempt to address some of or listen to some of the concerns that were mentioned in the letter about the Black community saying, having some issues with some of the bike lanes and things like that. I wonder if you got any new information or new perspectives from attending that meeting about this particular project.
Yeah, no, it did not come up in that meeting. I think it was useful to listen. I think as people are worried about the transformation of their neighborhood, and, just that context, I think provides, some parameters for what is really important to people. And, I think one of my big takeaways in the, quote unquote debate over this project is, the central issue. I just want to underscore what Randy said. It's really safety for all users, cars, bicycles, wheelchair users. And I think that was a smart way to position it. But no, Elizabeth, to answer your question, no discussion of it. Bill, and then Joseph Chesler.
Lucy, is the October 10 meeting, is that a go, no go vote meeting with council for this project?
Yeah, they will be supporting a resolution granting the city manager and staff the direction to move forward.
Okay. I guess I'll just ask the group, have we done everything we should do at this time to give our support? I mean, the letter's great. I just get worried that by the night of the meeting, they kind of already made up their minds. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my gut. And if there's something else we can do to influence the position, because I assume since everybody on our committee is authoring that, we're all in favor of this, right? If there's anything else we can do, I think we should. I just don't know what that is.
Yeah. Joseph, thank you, Bill. And then to Maggie.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, and all of you. Clearly, safety is the primary concern for this. What also stood out to me, and was covered in Jack's letter, was the interconnectivity of this critical junction through downtown, and how important it is to feed into other opportunities for bike and ped access. I was struck by listening to the council discussion the other night, where these social inequity issues got woven into the discussion so firmly that several, or at least 2 of the council members indicated a negative position, and it I don't understand. I mean, there's clearly some lack of education or a particular bent on the East End neighborhood, for one, not understanding the value of such interconnectivity. And I hope we can overcome that in the debate on October 10. So, but thank you. And Jack, I think the letter was great, as well as the Greenway Committee's position. Let's keep our fingers crossed and do what we need to do, as Bill said.
Yeah, Councilwoman Ullman.
Hey y'all. A couple thoughts to Bill's point. Have we done everything? I loved the letter. Thank you very much. And I read it. I don't know if everybody else read it. So I would encourage you to map out who on council you all have relationships with that you could call and talk to, because I find that to be, there's just like a tier of listening that I'm capable of when I'm on the phone versus when I'm looking at a bunch of emails. So just the access is big. The other thing is think about any relationships you have with downtown residents or downtown business owners, because we know that there are a bunch of folks from that constituency that are vocally concerned about it. So I would love to hear, are they the loud voices, or are there other folks that just aren't talking about it as much who share that constituency? So I think thinking through those relationships that each of you might have would be helpful, and kind of asking them questions, seeing if they're interested in advocating. That would go a long way. The other thing I wanted to kind of put out there is something I'm still mulling on, but I think several folks have brought up this dynamic where we're hearing from several Black community leaders that the message of safety and connectivity isn't resonating with them, right? Because they're bringing something else up. And so I think a lot of times when there's a disagreement, it's that both people are speaking from their side of the desk. Both people might be right, but the priorities might not be. And for example, I was talking to a friend who runs a downtown business, is a Black woman, and she was saying, safety? What are you talking about? If you get me out on a bike, I feel more threatened because they've been plucking Black people in unsafe ways for years. Now you're going to put me on a road where someone could accidentally hit me? And I just was stopped in my tracks. I had not thought of it from a really different experience, a life experience. And so I think being in relationship and listening with what the why is from other people goes a long way. The other thing that I've heard when in conversations with various Black leaders is this idea that they don't know people who spend a lot of time on bikes, that the idea of a bike lane is just not some riding bikes for transportation or recreation just isn't something they're particularly interested in. And so it can feel as though here's this new asset the city wants to put money into that's not going to benefit me or my community. And oh, this is an old story where the white folks get a new shiny asset that I don't care about. I'm not saying I agree with or believe in either of those sentiments, but those are two things I've learned in conversations of different perspectives that have helped me ponder more, that have helped me understand more. So I just wanted to offer them. There was a third point. Oh, the third point is something I'd asked staff for, and I hope to get is I'm very curious to know about the total number of parking spaces downtown, whether they're public or public and private. And why is because an argument I also hear is, oh my gosh, this is discriminatory towards older folks who need parking. You're going to run people out of town, but it's 17 spaces. And as far as I know, we have like 1,500 spaces in decks. So if you do that math, the reduction in parking is like less than 0.001%. So that's, I think, an interesting data point to perhaps find and then share of when people loudly say you're killing downtown businesses, you're getting rid of parking. No, you're not. It's like a less than 0.00% reduction in parking. What are you talking about? So those are my, I was going to say 2 cents, but that's more like 25.
Yeah. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Lucy, for following up on that. Yeah, I just want to, I think one of my takeaways as well that I want to share, and this came up in what you were saying, Maggie, is just, sure, this is a $150,000 paint project downtown. We're also building a multi-billion-dollar bridge over the river. Like, this is peanuts compared to it. But I think where I have opened my ears and have tried to be a thoughtful listener is kind of the wound that this project rips off for many communities in town, whether that has to do with gentrification or how people view various things, or just the fact that we're undergoing such massive change in Asheville. And this is just another change that seems to draw a strong reaction from people. So while I think a strong voice is certainly needed and leadership is certainly needed from us and members of council and beyond, I also encourage folks to just put their listening ears on and ask really good questions when you do find people who are concerned about this. I've learned a lot. That'll be a good takeaway for me. Bill, you had your hand up. Is your hand down?
No, I rose it again after listening to some of the comments, and it relates. Is a threat of this project some type of a social justice issue? I ask that because, Joseph, I heard the same thing you did Tuesday night in a huge way. I was in the meeting, and I saw a lot of pain demonstrated by the East Asheville people of all colors. And I hadn't experienced it to that level, I don't think, in my whole life. And so it was new to me. And it meant that we need to listen. So I'm just thinking that if this is a threat, and if we can get our ducks in a row and find out and, listen more, if we have friends that would know about those concerns, I don't know, Randy, in your cycling groups or other people who are active cyclers. I'm not an active cycler, so I don't have that, but just be very intentional around listening to what those concerns are. That might help a little bit. It may not solve the problem, but it'd be good to just not get blindsided, is all I'm saying, in preparation for a vote that's coming up in 3 weeks.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, back to Elizabeth.
Yeah, a lot of what Maggie, you were saying about the points are the things that I have heard in the past month from people in the Black community through some of the neighborhood advisory meetings and some of the matching grant programs at several meetings that I'd been to. And they brought up that, the Easton Valley neighborhood, that, example, well, they totally turned our streets around and added bike lanes, and we didn't want them. We don't ride on them, and there's never anybody on them. Those are the types of things I was hearing. And this is, I think, Bill, one of the things we're tuning into from that meeting is that it does seem like it is another thing, like Maggie said, like what, the people that bike, the people that want the greenways, the people, aren't the people that are necessarily riding the buses, and if it slows the buses down. So this project is, not only is it going to take me longer to get to work, but my water bill's going up, my whatever's going up. And then, but the people that ride the bikes are, primarily white. And so those are the types of things I had been hearing, just to add some of that. And I think that I'm not exactly sure how to address it, but part of it is just, it needs to be acknowledged, possibly in a bigger way.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Joseph Barker.
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback that. As a traffic engineer and a transportation engineer, I can say, like, Arkley has a history of eminent domaining people of color and just kind of railroading them and just doing whatever they want to do, not asking the community for input. So I think while as a traffic engineer, I'm like, oh, great, bike lanes into downtown. That's awesome. Like, that just sounds great. But it is it's a chance to educate. It's a chance to find middle ground. It's a chance to explain to these people that this is something that you could benefit from. Education, somebody mentioned education earlier. I think that's really key. I think a lot of people of color, Black people, see cycling as a white sport. They see, I don't know. Well, so in my profession, we call Most cyclists, we say, are mammals, middle-aged men in Lycra. And that's kind of the viewpoint. So that's kind of the viewpoint. So as a person of color in a low-income neighborhood that doesn't have $1,000 fancy bike, they see these bike lanes and they're like, what does this do for me? This is just another example of somebody coming through my neighborhood and doing something I didn't ask for without my permission. So I think it's just I just want to say, I think we have to have some grace and handle it gently with people that raise these concerns.
Leanna.
I think there's, it feels like we're having a zero-sum game discussion. And I just want to acknowledge that there are multiple truths at play, right? Safe travel is vital to prevent crashes. We started this meeting hearing about pedestrian and bicycle crashes and fatalities. And it is the responsibility of our elected officials to care for our safety as who they are charged to help protect and govern for. The funds are available. In fact, they were previously approved in a budget. And so it's really a matter of giving the all clear to let the contract for the work. We are not going to further gentrify downtown. That has happened. It has happened. That has left, and I think that theoretically with the I-26 project and bike lanes coming into downtown from the west over the French Broad River, we're going to be bringing more cyclists into a community, into downtown. And if we lack the infrastructure, if we haven't planned ahead for what is to come, we are setting up precarious situations. And then I think the last thing I will say is that just recently we were asked to suspend the DOT's restriping of Biltmore Avenue from Hilliard to Pack Square because it was kind of caught up in this embroiled frothiness of this project, which we did. We did so knowing that it would have been free if the DOT had included it as part of the process that they had undertaken, and that the city would be on the hook for $50,000 to restripe in the future. I think we can't keep delaying expenditures for some future time. If we have the plan to do it now and we have the conditions to do it now, it would be beneficial to do it now. And that doesn't mean that all of the other realities about community engagement and advanced communication and advanced engagement aren't necessary.
Yeah, thank you. Leanna. Maggie, you have the floor.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I appreciate, Leanne, everything you brought in. On that point, I'll also add that my experience on this topic in particular is that I'm hearing the loudest concern from downtown businesses. So, if we're trying to do our deep listening and build community and find places where the both and serves more people, I think the downtown businesses feel very concerned about safety right now. And so I hear expressed, I keep screaming for help around downtown safety and you're giving me a bike lane. What the heck? So just want to add that in of I think that's where there's a lot of volatility and a lot of why this is complicated, because it's very hard looking at them and going, yeah, but we can do multiple things at the same time because they're just not getting what they need. So I think that's a big focus. The other thing is just want to say that my experience with, what do I want to say? I think what we're talking about around equity and perceptions of value in bike infrastructure and transportation infrastructure is so important and so healthy for this committee to be having. And I'm so thankful. And I have seen sometimes the argument be co-opted to make the same argument. So I just want to give a loving warning flag of, as we advocate, we want to make sure that if there's something that we're working with community partners from BIPOC communities, that we're lifting their voices up, because nothing feels worse than being like, I'm going to make my same argument, but I'm going to throw the word equity in. That's just really, and I don't think any of you would, but I will say in my own journey to be a better white person, I have accidentally done that. And it didn't help me. So I just want to put a loving flag out there for my own times that I've tripped and stumbled.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. I'd also like to point out before I turn it over to you, Elise, is I just want to give a huge shout out to Anna Sexton and Lucy and all of the other transportation staff. Anna gave an incredible presentation that addressed many of the concerns and the very strong benefits of this project. And she made a very strong case. So just really well done. The city, in my opinion, has been very thorough in this process. That's my personal opinion. But I just wanted to recognize Anna and the great work that she did to the Downtown Commission in that presentation. You're welcome, Anna. Elise.
Hi. I've been kind of quiet on this up to this point just because I have a lot of conflicting ideas about it. And kind of like Leanna said, there's a lot of different conflicting truths, but they all exist simultaneously. And after the council meeting 2 weeks ago, I was really curious about where crashes were happening and looked into some of the APD data. And certainly there are a lot of pedestrian and bicycle crashes here. That's due to density, and it's also no coincidence that historically Black neighborhoods are located near this density. That didn't just happen by chance. So I do want to respect what the Black community has to say. It's really unfortunate what happened on MLK that seems to really have soured some relationships here. And I think it's really important that we work intentionally to build those relationships back, or we're gonna come up against this problem every time that we try to put a bike lane in. And Councilmember Ullman, maybe you were sort of getting at this too, but I'm hesitant to go at this from like it's an education problem. That feels a little belittling to the experience of the Black community. And I think in a lot of spaces, people might come in with the idea of like, oh, well, obviously this is a great idea and we just need to convince this community that it's a good idea for them and benefits them. And so I just want to be cautious because I think that going at it from that perspective is going to harm the relationships that we're trying to build more than help them. But I do support this project because this is where the density is. It's where we need the connectivity. But I do think that we need to be intentional about listening to the Black community and really listening, not like the situation with the hotel that we just heard last night where the residents were asking for something and the developers wouldn't budge on the one thing that was really being asked. Those are just some of my general thoughts on the matter.
Thank you very much, Elise, for summarizing. And to that point, Kenny, I believe, is going to forward a motion regarding the Greenway Committee's proposal, and our letter, of course, is part of the public record in support unanimously for this project. So that is part of the record.
Yeah, it's a long motion. I hope that's okay.
Yes.
I did want to circle back to Maggie. Do you think that having public comment at that meeting is worthwhile, even if it's kind of last minute and people already have made up their minds, or is it still important to have people show up and voice support for the project?
I think people are very different on council. What I always say, people, is advocate early and often. So do all the ways. It's just not one step. So I think the conversation last night at council was very moving, and I am listening deeply when I hear them. I also do the reading ahead of time, so early and often, like voting.
Okay, great. I do agree that I think most of the pushback has been from the business community. So yeah, well, okay. I'm gonna read the motion, Jack, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right. I move that we recommend the City Council approve the College Patton Bike Lane project, which has the support from both the Active Transportation Committee and the Multimodal Transportation Commission, as this project helps implement the City of Asheville's accessibility, sustainability, community health, affordability, and connectivity goals, and is in alignment with the city's 2009 Downtown Master Plan, 2012 Complete Streets Policy, 2016 Asheville in Motion Mobility Plan, 2018 Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, and City Council's vision for safe and accessible transportation for everyone, whether they use a wheelchair, walk, ride a bicycle, drive a car, or ride city buses, giving them choices in how they get around and the freedom to do so safely. Period.
Thank you, Kenny. Is there a second?
I'll second, Jack.
Thank you, Joe.
However, I wanted to, in terms of form, Kenny, wouldn't it be more appropriate to have like a preamble with some whereases and then a short statement of support?
I'll jump in there. For city council resolutions, that is typically the format, but I think for advisory committees, the motions are sufficient unless there's like really technical specific information that you want to be conveying. But ultimately, if you feel like adding some whereases, which would be explaining the why and the precedent, helps your argument, y'all should go for it, but it's not always necessary.
I think the same intent. I was just curious.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
How the commission feels.
Yeah,
I would second it, Jack and Kim.
okay. As stands, a second from Joe. Any other comments or questions regarding the motion before we take a vote?
We threw in we wanted to include all the existing plans that city has adopted that say we want these things. I know that some frustration from city staff has come about because they're trying to implement what has already been approved. And so we wanted to make sure that we're referencing these plans trying to be implemented here.
Any other questions, comments? We'll take a vote on the motion. Kenny.
Aye.
Joseph Barker.
Aye.
Joseph Chesler.
Aye.
Leanna Joyner.
Aye.
Bill Loftus.
Aye.
Elise Martyr.
Aye.
Randy Warren.
Aye.
And Mike Zukowski.
Aye.
And I'm an aye, and the motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for the good conversation. Really robust. It's a important issue. So thank you all for everything that everyone said was valuable. We will move on to our next agenda item under unfinished business. And Lucy, correct me if I get out of order, but I think the updated minutes, I'm looking at an old one, but I think the next item is to review a draft of the Multimodal Transportation Commission Rules of Procedures updates. This is an informational item.
That's correct.
Okay.
And Anna Sexton will be walking you through that.
All right, Anna, floor is
All right.
yours.
Hello, everyone. I also just want to acknowledge and appreciate the discussion that y'all had. This has been a very educational process, I think, for everyone involved in that project. And to maybe bring some levity to the situation, this should be far less controversial than what we were just talking about. So,
all right, Anna.
We have a draft of the Multimodal Transportation Commission's Rules of Procedure to share with you today. That's also been shared in the agenda as well. So you had a copy available to you for review. And the purpose of bringing forth this draft is to modify or make make some of the language less clunky, just do some wordsmithing and word tweaking to some of the language in there, and to also update some sections with more current and consistent language with what we see in other boards and commissions rules of procedure. And then also this really sets the stage for us to move forward with transitioning the Greenway Committee into the Active Transportation Committee. So replacing the references in the old rules of procedure from Greenway Committee to Active Transportation Committee. Today, what we'll do is I'll kind of walk through all of these changes with you. And I think it would be helpful if everyone held their questions or comments until the end. There's not a ton to go over, so I should be able to get through those fairly quickly. Today, we're just looking for discussion and feedback from the commission on these draft updates, and then we'll bring any feedback that we receive today that we can incorporate into sort of a final draft back to you all at the October meeting for you to take a vote on. So what I'll do is pull this up and share my screen. Oh, let's see. Great. And so this is the document that was also linked in the meeting agenda. Oh, sorry. I'll scroll down here to Article 3. This is where some initial substantive changes begin regarding membership of the Multimodal Transportation Commission and the composition of the commission's membership. We have it reading now that still have 2 voting members representing transit interests, and it would be 2 voting members representing active transportation interests. So that is a change from before, where you would have, or in the current rules of procedure, rather, two folks representing Greenway, 2 folks representing Bike Ped. Now it'll be 2 folks representing active transportation overall. So that would bump up 3 at-large members to 5 at-large members. Still maintain ex officio members from Planning and Zoning, Neighborhood Advisory Committee. This Section 5 is highlighted in green with a note from Jessica. It does have on here that the commission can have an ex officio member from SACE. This is something that the commission can consider removing or leaving. You're not obligated at this time to fill that seat, but something to think about. Section 2 here under appointments, I believe the only changes to that, that's language that doesn't exist in the current draft, or I'm sorry, the current rules of procedure, but it's language that appears in a lot of other boards and commissions rules of procedure. So we're just adding this language in as well. Some very basic points of clarification. One under Section 4, just saying members shall give the chair and staff liaison advance notice if they're unable to attend a meeting. And then also regarding terms of office, appointees may hold over beyond the expiration of their terms until their successors are appointed and qualified. Moving on to Article 4 under officers and duties. Staff support, this highlighted section doesn't really change from what is currently there, but it does remove this section about the MMTC's secretary. This is outdated language. The MMTC hasn't had a secretary for a number of years, since I've been at the city and also since Lucy's been at the city. So I'm just taking that out to modernize the language. Down here under Article 5, meetings, this is something that you're welcome to discuss today. Under a number of meetings a year, it says there shall be at least 6 regular meetings of the commission each year. This is the proposed language. Right now, it says that the commission shall have at least 9 regular meetings. 6 is also a number seen throughout other boards and commissions rules of procedure. So there's flexibility with that, and something that you guys can discuss today and come up with what works for the commission. And then I think down here, this is talking about appointments of committees. So this is really where we change language and references that currently exist for the Greenway Committee to Active Transportation Committee. It's fairly straightforward. The other language in that section or article doesn't change. Oh, let me scroll back up. I'm sorry, I scrolled over something right here. This conflict of interest section, somehow missed highlighting it. This section right here was its own standalone article at the end of the rules of procedure, which it just fits better here and also mirrors the flow of other boards and commissions rules of procedures. So we eliminated that article. We moved conflict of interest under Article 7 for voting. And what that means is that this amendments article just changes numbers. But as I mentioned, the way that the rules work is we present these amendments in writing at this meeting. Y'all are open to discuss and give us feedback, and then we'll incorporate that and come back with a final draft at the next meeting where you'll take a vote. So
thanks, Anna.
That's it.
Yeah, folks, questions, Leanna.
Anna, I noticed in Ordinance 4190, establishing the Multimodal Transportation Commission, the purpose statement is far more robust. It has more, I would say, proactive engagement in some respects, with development and implementation of aspects related to transportation planning work. And the current draft speaks to more the advisory capacity of the commission there in Article 2. And so I'm just curious, it looks like in the amendment that from the original ordinance that they didn't address the change to the purpose. And I'm just wondering if you know what the change date was on the purpose.
Let's see. That Ordinance 4190, which Leanna is referencing, is also linked in the meeting agenda. That's the ordinance here. I'm not going to toggle back and forth, and I'll leave it where it is right now. But that's the ordinance that establishes the Multimodal Transportation Commission for the city of Asheville. That ordinance is dated May 14th, 2013. There's another ordinance linked in the meeting agenda, Ordinance 4314. And that's the ordinance amending the Multimodal Transportation Commission. That ordinance makes amendments.
I see it now, actually, Anna. In that amendment, I missed it the first time I read it. Section 2 says purpose would be deleted in its entirety.
Yeah.
And then it looks like probably there was some collective work to reframe what that purpose statement looked like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, there's that's just something that when working on this, we reviewed all of that, but it had been a while since I looked at that. So I wasn't entirely sure either until I went back to look at that document. But that's why.
Folks, any other questions or comments for Anna? Thank you for your work on sorting this out. Anna, sounds like these changes make sense. Elise is up.
I guess I have concern over, I guess the 6 meetings is just a minimum. It's not saying we would move to 6 meetings, but given that we seem to always push things off of our agenda each month, like we don't have enough time to get to them, I would not recommend reducing our meeting schedule.
Lucy, were you going to say something?
Jack, if I might give a comment to the 6
Lucy, go ahead.
instead of 9. We just, I think, made that decision after 3 years of COVID, which really took us down to the minimum amount of numbered meetings. Not that I would ever hope that happens again, but if the event that we have some unforeseen issues like that, it would still let us meet our standards.
Thanks, Lucy. That makes sense. Joe Chesler.
Yes, hi. Anna, great job. I can see where we did need to make these changes. However, I'm a little not confused, but I'm a little puzzled by the wording in Article 8 under dealing with standing committees. And I wanted to offer, at the risk of wordsmithing a little bit, I wanted to offer an alternative. In section 1, I would strike everything after the word committees, and I'll propose that section read to and appoint committees to concentrate on specific modes of transportation or areas of study, period. And then in section 2, if again, we're amending this from a 2013 version, I presume. I don't think that language is necessary. I would simply rewrite all of the first paragraph of section 2 to read as follows. This commission shall have the authority to establish standing committees, including the Transit Committee and the Active Transportation Committee, parentheses, formerly the Greenway Committee, period. And then the rest would stay. I just think that a little clearer as to what the function or what the standing committees do, gives us the authority to do that, and clarifies the renaming of the Greenway Committee. Throw that out there as a possible consideration and leave it at that.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks. I was trying to figure out a way to sort of provide those suggested edits in real time so that we could see in the document. I'm not sure I'm able to do that without doing a copy and paste so that I don't leave out anything that you said. But I can certainly make those suggested edits.
Well, let me throw it in the chat and you can consider it further.
Yeah, that's great. And we're not voting this time, so we'll have another opportunity to fine tune perhaps.
Right.
Leanna, off to you. I'd like to move on to our last agenda item, but I do want to make sure folks have an opportunity to comment on that.
Yeah, just a quick question. I noticed the deletion of the secretary section and the staff liaison keeping minutes. Our minutes are quite succinct and which is great and relies on the recording. I do think as a body for our citizenry, we could do more public education around the kinds of things that we discuss beyond kind of sharing the summary minutes. I guess my question is more technical. is there a prohibition from any of us individually taking notes in a way that kind of summarizes in plain language some of the topics and points of interest and likely outcomes for sharing through our networks or our communities? I don't think there is. I just want to make sure.
Lucy, do you have the answer to that? I would think that given, because I don't know, but this is my take on it, given that the meetings are recorded and that people have the ability to view those meetings and see for themselves what was discussed, how it was discussed, that if you took personal minutes and shared those with your, or personal meeting notes and shared those with your networks, that seems fine.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a problem with that, Leanna.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good question worth asking.
Yeah, we can have a definitive answer from the clerk's office by next month's discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions? Anna, thank you for doing this work. Looking forward to the work of the Active Transportation Committee coming up. I think it's a great move forward. In our remaining minutes, we've got a couple of more agenda items. The next one up on the unfinished business is recommendations to NCDOT regarding bicycle facilities with Randy Warren.
So I tried to share and it wouldn't allow me to talk then. But let me see if I can find my meeting again here. There. Can you guys see that?
Not yet, Randy.
Okay, let me see. Okay, how about that? Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Merriman Avenue, a huge issue. We took us forever to try and get it a road diet put in. They put they agreed. Finally, NCDOT finally agreed to do that. They said it would all happen by last November, Thanksgiving. And just recently, and actually someone said earlier in this meeting that they were still applying some paint now, but apparently it's somewhat done, but it's still a huge issue, obviously. I mean, we when we got our last update, Jessica said it was in the June meeting, I think, that they still haven't done the timing of the lights and all sorts of different things. But the bike lanes themselves have a number of issues, and I just wanted to go over some of those issues real quick and make some recommendations. And I'm not sure exactly what you're seeing there, but okay. So some significant issues. There's limited indications that a bike lane is present. There's no signage at the beginning and end of the bike lane. There's limited bike lane symbols in the bike lane, and the width and look of the bike lane is similar to the motor vehicle lane. And then there's an inconsistent design. There's occasional use of buffered lanes, occasional use of transitions between buffered next to motor vehicle lane, and varying width of the bike lane. And so I have some examples of some solutions. Skip dash to visually define the motor vehicle lane and provide a visual buffer to the bike lane, and then consistent bike lane width by using buffered on both sides, the traffic side, the curb side of the lane, and it can change. So I was in LA and took some pictures of that recently, but this is on the far north side of the lane, of the bike lane. And before this, there's no signs that even say it's a bike lane. There's no symbols in the roadway, and it's wide enough it looks like a traffic lane. It is an odd traffic lane with the curb there, but it's just, again, poorly implemented. We need to get that taken care of. The width, the width, it looks like a traffic lane. It's very similar to it. It's not defined in any way. Again, there's no symbols. It's just a recipe for problems. And I reached out to NCDOT and they said, oh, we're not using buffered lanes because we can't use it the whole length. Yet here we see a buffered lane on the lane too. So they're not even consistent. There's occasional use of a buffered lane, even though they said they don't use it. And then there's occasionally use of transition lanes. So this is, they have this huge, gigantic, buffer between the traffic lane and then push the bike lane all the way up against the curb, which you can see there's a bunch of sand in there. And they said that they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to put people against the curb. So they're just not even, they don't know what they're doing, obviously. Where am I here? So, here again, there's some striped, here they said also too, they weren't gonna, they are not putting in a defined bike lane width, but here they do. Here they put a left and right side of the bike lane, where other parts they only put a left side in the bike lane. It's just really, really poorly executed. I mean, it's unbelievable. Anyway, so here's some examples of some solutions. I was in LA this summer, and they have a whole bunch of situations that are somewhat similar to ours, and they do different things than we do. For example, here, they have this skip dash line to the left of the bike lane, which lets cars know that they should stay a little bit away. So it's not officially a buffer, but it still gives a visual delineation of where the bike lane is. Here's another example too, where they have a buffer on the left side and then they have a stripe on the right side so that you're not pushed up against the curb, but it still looks like a bike lane, where right now what we have is just a line on the left side of the bike lane and then leave the rest of the space open, which then invites cars to drive in it. But this way here, it looks like a bike lane. So there's obviously easy things they can do like that. And then finally, here's just another example of the transition, because NCDOT said because the road width varies, they didn't want to have a different look throughout the bike lane, all which they already do anyway. But here's an example too of where there's space on the right and then it narrows down and they just eliminate that space on the right as the road narrows. So there's easy solutions to these things. NCDOT just isn't doing it. So I think we should make some specific recommendations to NCDOT, not necessarily specifically about this one, but this is a good example, and they should do it to Merriman. There should be a clear indication that a bike lane is present. They need to have signs at the beginning and end of the bike lane. They need to have more bike lane symbols to ensure that it's clear that the bike lane is present. They need to differentiate the look of the bike lane from the motor vehicle traffic lane. There should be a consistent design, which is not at all, to maintain the consistent look of a bike lane. So people understand that the whole length of this is a bike lane, and the width of the bike lane can stay the same while the width of the buffering on one or both sides can vary. And then the use of buffer lanes should be consistent as well. So if there's space for it, they can have it. If there's not space for it, they don't have it. So there's an idea that we have a buffer lane when we have space. We don't. And you can transition between the two very easily, as we've seen in other parts of the country that being done. So DOT has been extremely challenging to deal with in this process. And who knows if they even want to listen to us at all. But they're basically saying they're going to do an evaluation and they're going to take this bike lane out if they don't agree with that it's been effective or they don't like it. So I think that before they even start that, not only do they have to do all the other things too, with like the loop detectors and getting those things right, but install bike lanes that are meaningful and that make sense first. And if they do that, then we can start the evaluation process.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Randy. And I know you were short on time, but I appreciate you taking time to put that together. That was very informative and helpful. Joe has a comment question.
Oh, I think everybody already knows what my comments and questions are going to be, and I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. I would love for DOT to go out there with some of us during the week and look at stuff. I have seen people drive in the bike lane. Literally, I have seen them do it in front of me while I'm on my bike. Everything that Randy has said, I agree with 10,000%. The timing is horrible at every single light. That still hasn't gotten fixed. And I want to make sure that what I believe Jessica mentioned last month, or at one of these times we've talked about it, that DOT is not starting that evaluation period until all of these things are done, including the timing. I don't want them to say, oh no, we finished the painting back in January, and that's when we're starting the eval period. I'm pretty sure that's what she said. But I mean, biggest thing is somebody needs to hold NCDO's feet to the fire, and nobody is. And I will refrain from using French. It's a disaster.
Bill.
Well, thank you, Randy. This was awesome. My only comment is I wouldn't trust them to be able to do this on their own. Even if we walked half the way and told them what was wrong, 2 weeks later or 5 weeks later or 6 weeks later, nobody from their team is going to be able to go out there and do it right unless we give them a specification on what to do where. So this might be asking our staff to take the time to write a spec document, but I don't think they'll be able to do that on their own without us guiding them very, very properly.
Randy, take it. And can you offer maybe a suggestion as well of what action we can take as a commission next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Bill, you're exactly right. We actually asked NCDOT many, many times for their striping plan, and they never gave us one because we think they didn't have one, you know, and they're going to let this out to a contractor without a plan. So you're right. I think there needs to be something else done with that way. But I think, so the start is that so to Jack's point, is that if we can recommend, if we can make a recommendation to NCDOT that they follow these guidelines that we have and then offer, well, just that first. And then on the side, we can offer assistance and to help them with this process, because there's lots of expertise around, either from a consultant, which someone should get paid actually for doing this, but even if not that, you know, supplying them with drawings that would be applicable to the different situations on this for sure. And then they have resources. NCDOT has resources. They have people, you know, like Brian was here earlier, they don't even utilize their own people to do these kinds of things, but they have people statewide that are experts in this area that we called in to the meetings on Merriman, and they were very quiet during the meetings. They felt like intimidated to even make suggestions, but they have people that have expertise that could do this very well. They're just not using them. So, yeah, I guess the recommendation would be that NCDOT installs an appropriate bike lane, and we can help them decide what is appropriate.
I wonder, Randy, my suggestion might be if you'd be willing to perhaps draft a letter with specific points that can come on behalf, that can be shared with us and come on behalf of the commission. Obviously, we don't advise NCDOT, but this is in our purview because it is the city of Asheville. That might be the appropriate way to move forward. Bill?
Yeah, maybe we should just, our expectation is there's a detailed design effort with any implementation project. If they put in a road, if they put in anything, there has to be an engineering spec. So they have to come up with the engineering spec, and they probably have to contract for it, and that's on their dime. I think that's the expectation. That's my expectation anyway.
Elise?
I was just going to ask, like, if there are best practices or industry standards for this kind of thing. Like, I'm a layperson, I don't, but in what I do, there are best practices and industry standards that we follow. So I assume there has to be something out there, or a nearby city that already has some type of design standards for their bike lanes that we can mirror, just so that we know what to expect and get what we're expecting.
Randy?
Yeah, there's a number of things. You know, there's municipal, maybe standard control, MUGCD. There are some standards, but the thing is too is they're applied to specific situations, and so that's the kind of thing you can't just say here's what you do in this situation, because there's different road varying widths and different places do different things. But there are certainly best practices, and that's like some of the examples of things I took in pictures of LA. There's way that people have done this implementation much better. So we kind of actually going to need to take different pieces, like, you know, where there's a bus, you know, stop, for example, in the bike lane. There's things that people do, and there are some standards for that kind of stuff too. But that needs to be one piece of it. You know, where they apply buffer, you know, where they don't apply buffer. So there's certainly different examples of this all the time, but there's not like one. I mean, Lucy might and Anna might say differently than this too. But from what I know, my dealing with this too is that almost nobody has one guide they go by. They're looking at a number of different things to try and fit their situation, and then it's up to them whether they say, oh, we're going to take the easy way out, just put a stripe down there and let them on their own, which they kind of did in this situation, or they say, hey, let's try and make this as best possible and keep people as safe as possible. And then here's what I saw in Charlotte, here's what I saw in LA, here's what I saw in Madison. and let's put them here together. And NCDOT doesn't seem to have much of an appetite for that. Although, like I said, there are experts at NCDOT that I've talked to before that know how to do this right, and Division 13 isn't using them to do this. So I think that we could get NCDOT to use their own resources to help with this. Then they'd be, it wouldn't cost them anything. There's people they're paying for already to do this. Use them. That'd be great, right? So it's just, it's flabbergasting, but it's a DOT.
We have time for one more comment, Joseph, and then we'll try and put a bow on this and wrap up a next step. Go ahead, Joseph Barker.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of best practices, I mean, as a traffic engineer, I love NACDO's urban design guide, urban street design guide. Really, it's considered the most cutting it. Yep, Lucy's got it. She's holding it up. It's really like it's like the forward-thinking urban street design guide. So that's a great resource. In general, in my experience with DOTs, most DOTs are controlling rural roads. So when they get into city centers and they have to make changes, they're out of their wheelhouse usually. They're usually thinking rural design. So, just what we've been talking about, there's a good chance the contractor was just told, hey, run a bike lane up the curb. And they did the best they could with very little guidance. So, but just the question about best practices, the NACDO design guide, if we want to reference anything in this recommendation, that's where I would start.
And Randy, do you a last word on maybe our next step? Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah. So you're right. I try to put at least at the end recommendations to NCDOT, but I think you're right though. I think in when we were doing this Merriman project, I'm working on this for several years, I can use some of their own complete streets language, I think, to help. They're supposed to have an established committee with very specific members of that committee when they do complete streets projects. And from what I've dealt with at NCDOT so far is they don't never do that. I had to ask specifically for them to do that for the Merriman project, and they didn't even do it then. They just kind of involved some people in meetings. So our next step might be to say, hey, create this committee that your complete streets policy says you're supposed to create for this, and then have these experts use NACDO and MUDCD resources and other best practices to create an appropriate bike lane for this, and then we're happy to help with that.
Yeah, great.
So if I can do that, maybe I'll even formalize that for our next meeting.
Yeah, that would be great. Let's do that. I think we have obviously some great expertise here. So thank you, Randy, for bringing that forward. Sorry we had to expedite that conversation, but I'm glad we got it in, because another controversial bike lane project. If any of y'all read the comments in the Mountain Express, it's always there. We have one last item, folks, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you for your feedback on an agenda. I do want to share some of the results and make a recommendation for a date. My goal was to establish a date and a time for our retreat, and then we'll circle back around to be able to develop a broader invitation list and an agenda. Lots of folks had great comments on agenda items, but we'll table that for a little bit later. Most popular was to do two 4-hour sessions. And so I'm going to recommend that we do that. There was also, I think, a strong support for doing them apart from each other, several weeks apart, which I also thought was a good idea. And also most popular was doing a Friday. So based on the dates of availability or unavailability, I'm going to suggest that we convene on Friday, January 17th from 8 to 12, and then again on Friday, February 2nd from 8 to 12. We could potentially do one Friday and one Saturday morning. Would there be interest in that? So what I'll recommend, folks, is that we'll retreat on, oh yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was completing that survey before this meeting, and I don't know if it didn't submit. I can't do Fridays, and since I'm a non-voting member, y'all can decide if everybody else can. But yeah.
Yeah, as
Fridays,
much as obviously is what I think the priority is to get the 9 voting members there.
Okay.
And I unfortunately, yeah, Bill, go ahead.
You know, January 12th is a holiday weekend, so that might be a constraint for some people.
This is the 19th. Is the 19th a holiday weekend?
No, the next Monday is Martin Luther King Day.
But I heard the 17th, January.
Oh, I'm
17th.
sorry. I wrote down the 12th. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Anna, go ahead.
I think you're talking about Friday, January 19th.
Yes.
In which case, that is the Friday of a holiday weekend for MLK Day on Monday.
Got it. So that's a bad one.
Let me double check, or maybe it's the weekend the week
No,
before.
MLK is the 15th.
The 15th? Okay, got it. Friday the 19th is good as far as holiday weekends.
Yeah, good. Okay, that's what I thought when I looked at it, but I'm often wrong on that. So how about this? Here's what I'll propose, you all, is that we retreat on Friday, January 19th from 8 to 12. And let's have a second session on Saturday, February the 3rd, from 8 to 12-ish. We can play around with those times. And that way we can get folks like Elizabeth who may not be available on Friday. So that's what we'll shoot for. Any concerns with that? Okay, I will send out an email, folks, so we can mark that, and you can mark your calendars. And then as we move forward, we'll work on facilitation, place. It will be in person, by the way. I'd like to recommend that we do it in person, and we'll work out facilitation. We'll open the floor to agenda items and the things that we want to get done at that meeting. So thanks, folks. I think it'll be really valuable for our group. Yeah, Elise.
Would it be possible to move that a little bit later? I'm just being honest. 8 o'clock in the morning is going to be hard for me.
Any thoughts, folks?
I agree. 8 o'clock is awfully early. I don't normally get up before 10.
Oh, I was going to say at least 9.
To accommodate you sleepers, here's what we'll do. We'll have one morning session, 8 to 12 on Friday, that accommodates early morning people like me. And then on Saturday, February 3rd, we can maybe do 10 to 2.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll work out, maybe we'll figure out lunch or something like that, but that can work into the agenda. Maybe we'll tweak those times as we go forward, but go ahead and mark them out on your calendar. And I think that'll help us set a great agenda for 2024 to be an even more effective commission down the road. Any other comments or thoughts on that, folks? So unless there are any objections, I will now adjourn the meeting. Any objections? The meeting's adjourned. Oh, Leanna, you got a question.
No objection. I just wanted to lift you up, Jack, for an efficiently led meeting. Thank you so much. Big props.
Hey, thank you. Thank you all. Great comments and appreciate